Hello and welcome to the Daily Politics.
My Lords, they have voted contents 289, not contents 272.
Unelected peers are accused of committing a constitutional outrage as they frustrate the will of the elected Commons on cuts to tax credits. George Osborne says the Lords will have to be dealt with. But how? The Chancellor also says he's in listening mode after last night's defeat, but can he save face and money while softening the impact of his tax credit cuts? Jeremy Corbyn cedes some control of the Scottish Labour Party. Can it help turn around the party's fortunes? We'll be talking to the party's leader in Scotland, Kezia Dugdale. And it may have an appalling human rights record, but is Britain's relationship with Saudi Arabia too important to put at risk? All that in the next hour. With us for the whole of the programme today, someone who loves causing outrage, constitutional or otherwise, the journalist and writer Toby Young. Welcome to the programme.
Good afternoon.
So, in the past few minutes, the Chancellor has faced the Commons for the first time since last night's defeat at Treasury Questions. Let's have a listen to some of those exchanges.
Of course, on only 5 occasions in recent decades have the House of Lords ever blocked or rejected a statutory instrument, never on a financial matter. And we had a whole range of opinions from Lord Butler, the former Cabinet Secretary, to constitutional experts like Vernon Bogdanor telling us yesterday that this was unprecedented. It is something we are going to have to address. The Prime Minister has made that very clear. And that is what we've got to do in order to make sure that the elected House of Commons is responsible for the tax and spend decisions that affect the people of this country.
This is not a constitutional matter. They will lose £1,300 a year. Can I, given what happened in the other place last night, can I reassure the Chancellor that if he brings forward proposals to reverse the cuts to tax credits fairly and in full, he will not be attacked by this side of the House. Indeed, he will be applauded. But can he assure us that whatever proposals he brings forward, he will not support any that an independent assessment demonstrates will cause any child to be forced to live below the poverty line?
John McDonnell ending that piece. Well, with me now are the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary Owen Smith and the Conservative MP David Davis. Welcome to both of you. David Davis, what do you want George Osborne to do precisely in his autumn statement to mitigate the impact of the tax credit cuts?
Well, either directly or indirectly, to stage this change. I mean, the problem is that what George wants to do is to have the increasing minimum wage, the national living wage, they're now going to call it, take on the burden from the taxpayers paying the tax credits. The trouble was, all of the burden was taken off the taxpayer at the beginning. The national living wage doesn't get to its proper peak until the end of the Parliament. Just put them in step. It's simple. Put them in step, and that will take out most of the problem.
Right, and then you would be satisfied with that, and you think most of your colleagues would be satisfied with that?
There are technical issues which are horrible, but yes, broadly, yes, that's right.
Do you agree with that, or do you want something more radical? Do you actually want some sort of reversal in the tax credit cuts themselves, not just an extra bit of money or a staging of the transition to mitigate the impact of those cuts?
We've argued for repeal of them, and we'll be voting again this afternoon in about 2 hours' time for repeal. And the reason is, David is right, it will mitigate part of the change. Even if George Osborne were to raise the national minimum wage to £9.20, his excellent ambition by 2020, even if he were to do that immediately, people on average would be worse off as a result of the cuts. It won't offset the amount of money that the average family is set to lose as a result of the tax credit changes. Throw in the childcare allowance, the maximum 30 hours a week, throw in the personal tax allowance, add them all up, and they will still be on average worse off. So it's a bit of smoke and mirrors.
Right. So there's a divergence there in terms of what you want to see change.
I rest my case on saying it's complicated, as you saw there. But of course there's some fine-tuning.
Not for those families.
No,
it's very
yes,
simple.
Of course. But this is a very complicated system, and we've got some fine-tuning to do. But the simple truth is the staging will deal with most of the problem.
Right. Was this really the way to do it, though, to take on George Osborne and the government in this way. I mean, he had already said, or rather he had sent out people representing him to say he was in listening mode. Wouldn't it have been better to hear what he had to say?
Well, that was quite late on. I mean, I voted against this back in September, I think it was. And the difficulty was that we had a statutory instrument. Now, it's very technical again, but it was put to the House of Commons in a take-it-or-leave-it form. Now, if you really wanted to reform this sort of thing, there's a parliamentary procedure for it. It's called an Act of Parliament, you know, and you go through and you reform it. You don't say, here it is, here's this black and white thing, and I'll think about it after the event. I'm afraid it's too difficult, too important, too complex for that.
That was a mistake, wasn't it? I mean, that was a tactical and strategic error if you're just looking at it from a political parliamentary terms, from George Osborne's perspective, to, in a way, give the Lords room to say, this is not a piece of legislation that we are forced to vote on because it's a money matter. We can take it as a welfare matter. It wasn't announced in the manifesto. We can vote against this in all good conscience.
Well, the Conservatives did say in the manifesto that they were going to find £12 billion
but they didn't
worth of savings.
They didn't specify
from
tax
the
credits.
Working age welfare bill. So I don't think you can say it wasn't flagged
I'm not
at all
saying this, but this is what the Lords were saying.
I think it was clearly right to try and get this change through as quickly as possible, because George Osborne needs to reduce the welfare bill if he's going to meet his deficit target of bringing the books into balance in this Parliament. Now, it may have been, in retrospect, quicker to have included it in a finance bill, but I think that's because he didn't anticipate that the House of Lords would behave quite so outrageously.
A misjudgment on his part?
Well, a misjudgment, I suppose. Maybe he thought that the House of Lords wouldn't try and supplant the Labour Party as Her Majesty's opposition, which it's only had to do because the Labour Party has effectively abdicated from that role. Maybe he didn't anticipate that the Labour Party would be so mad as to elect Corbyn.
But Toby, one issue here. Look, this is not coming into effect until April. There was plenty of time to take it through. As a
you probably would have tried to delay a finance bill and pass amendments in the House of Commons.
No, amend it. Yes, absolutely. That's my job. You know, we hold the government to account, and you know we have constituents.
David, I'm curious. Are you going to
to
continue to support Frank Field's motion on Thursday?
Yeah.
Given that, but it only asks the government to reconsider the impact.
That's right.
And that's what they've agreed to do anyway in the autumn statement. So why ask them to do something they've already agreed to do?
Right. Well,
we don't know what it is yet, do we? So,
you're not asking them to do anything specifically, only to reconsider.
Stage it is what I'm asking. You know, stage it, and there'll be other MPs standing. You'll find a number of Tory MPs standing up in that debate, talking about the sorts of things they want to see. That should be very productive for a government.
It seems needlessly rebellious now, given that the Chancellor has conceded and said he's going to reconsider the impact of these changes on the lowest paid in the autumn statement. So why vote for the motion on Thursday?
This is the House of Commons. It's our job to represent our constituents. Some of them will lose quite a lot of money out of this, people who can't afford to. So it's not just, yes, we'll do something. It's what you're going to do. It's what the detail is, what the grand strategy is. Now, all of us want to see, and you'll hear on Thursday, Tories and Labour, I suspect, all parties, saying, look, we want to see the deficit dealt with in this Parliament. There are ways to do that which don't have this effect. And that's the proper way to do it.
I mean, but hang on, Toby, Toby, let me put a question to you, because in the end, George Osborne, and it seems you are blaming the Lords, calling it a constitutional outrage, but actually this was what a lot of Tory MPs felt. They had stood up and made it very clear that they had a real problem with these tax credit cuts because of the impact on their constituents. We heard from David Willits. Even the Sun newspaper was criticising the government. So in the end, the Lords did the deed, but actually it was, as some people feel, only doing what a lot of people felt.
If Conservative MPs felt that they couldn't support this particular statutory instrument, they had 3 opportunities to vote against it, and they didn't. It's passed the House of Commons 3 times, which is why it's so outrageous that the unelected chamber has now effectively rejected it.
It's just not true. All bills are voted on 3 times in the House of Commons, most bills, before they get to the House of Lords. It's yet another totally bogus argument. Truth is, the House of Lords spoke for the country yesterday. 60% of people in Britain, when asked, think George Osborne has got this wrong and that we shouldn't be penalising hard-working people for working hard. We shouldn't be trying to balance the books on their backs. And that's why the House of Lords was dead right yesterday to reject this. And the constitutional crisis.
Well, we'll come on to the Constitution in just a moment.
The House of Lords didn't straightforwardly reject it. They said, let's just see a plan to ameliorate its impact for the first 3 years of its life. They're effectively saying,
for everybody.
OK, make the reforms to the tax credit system, but don't let them kick in and for 3 years. You're effectively saying let them kick in nearer the election, where they'll have a greater penalty on the Conservatives.
Would George Osborne be wrong to lessen the impact? Should he stick to his guns?
I think if he can find a way of meeting his deficit reduction target, finding those savings in the welfare budget that the party has said it's going to find in this Parliament, and ameliorate the impact on those hardest hit, then of course he should do that. But that's not easy. I mean, that's easier said than done.
Right, but do you think actually politically he should just stay firm, which is what some people are advising?
I think well, it depends what you mean by stay firm. He's already said that he's going to look at ways of ameliorating the impact on the hardest hit in the autumn statement, and I don't suppose they will introduce another statutory instrument or include these measures in a finance bill until after the autumn statement. So we really have to see what he proposes.
Which is the smart way to do it. But the simple truth at the moment is we don't even know. The Treasury have never published the interim figures for that, and I've asked them several times now. And if we have those numbers, we can see what it is. We can make a proper judgment. At the moment, we can't.
Right. There is one thing, though, from a timing point of view, and I will come to you in just a moment again. Owen, so peers want ministers to delay the tax credit cuts or put in some sort of transitional stage, as you were talking about, over 3 years or in 3 years' time. That'll be a year before the next general election, which would be then when the dramatic tax credit cuts could come in. That would be very difficult for your party.
I don't read that motion that way. I read that motion as changing it year by year by year. In other words, each time the national minimum wage goes up or the living wage goes up, then you cut back on tax credits a bit more. That's why I said it's complex, but it's year by year by year. So you can have a change in every year. That's one of the difficulties of this way. But that doesn't put it all in just a year before general election.
All right. I mean, John McDonnell said Labour wouldn't make political capital out of this if George Osborne changed his mind. So we're not going to hear any criticism or mocking from the Labour Party then, since George Osborne has said he is going to do something about it.
Well, what you're going to hear from me is delight that George Osborne has effectively admitted that he does need to revisit these plans, that it is going to hit hard-working people in this country much harder than people had appreciated, that George Osborne and David Cameron lied to the British public when they said they weren't going to do this before the last election. That's why the peers felt so strongly that they were able to make this statement.
Is that political? Is that making political capital out of this in a way that John McDonnell said he wouldn't do?
I think stating the truth, that when the Prime Minister appears on network television saying he's not going to do something and then does it the other side of the election, I think it is for us to call that out. He did say that. He said he wasn't going to...
You were shaking your head, David.
And David Gove said exactly the same. No, that's not true. He was talking about child tax credits.
Did he lie?
Yes, they are. Every year. 5 years.
Don't talk over each other. You disagree. David Davis, did he lie? Was there a sleight of hand by the government?
No, I don't think so. I think one of the problems was that the government started eliminating too many things and left a very small number of things to cut. That's where we ended up. But that's an election. That's hardly surprising.
Prefer him to cut pensions.
All right. Before we start another discussion,
I prefer to cut
briefly,
things like free travel for well-off pensioners. Pensioners these days are actually, quite a lot of them are quite well off.
we'll have this debate on another occasion, gentlemen.
This afternoon.
Thank you.